Katie, how's it going?
Doing great. I'm excited to be here.
Excited to have you here. You and I first met at Money 2020, which was awesome. A ton of people there, learned a lot. And now I'm excited to continue the conversation here. So, why don't we first start off? Let's assume there's some people listening here today that are just getting to know you for the first time. Tell us a little bit about your background. And then, for those that are just hearing about BankTech Ventures, give us kind of an overview of what you're all about.
Perfect. So I started my career on the operating side, helping to launch brands, grow audiences, and drive innovation and revenue for startups and also much larger companies like American Express. And along the way, I had the privilege of getting to meet people who are excited to start companies, and contributing to their success was something that I love to do. And so I realized that I really wanted to be on that investment side, helping to deploy capital to help them. And so went back and got my MBA so that I could go into venture and investing, and ended up in my first role with Petra Griffith of Wedbush Ventures, and then ended up through her meeting Carrie Ransom, who's our managing director at BankTech Ventures. And I loved this opportunity because it really combined the investing side that I was excited about, but also the ability to use my operating experience to help both our companies that we're investing in as well as our bank LPs. So I'll kind of get into bank tech and what what that's all about too. So BankTech Ventures is, we call ourselves a strategic fund because we're backed by over 100 community banks that really come to us to help support their innovation and growth. And it was originally launched about 3 years ago by key leaders in the community banking, bank technology, and FinTech space. And we saw the need to bridge this gap between traditional banking and then more of like those modern technology solutions. And so we say we act as their R&D arm, really providing the banks with a lot of market intelligence, helping to understand what kind of companies are out there. Of course, they want their returns as well, but understanding what's going to enhance their efficiency, help their service offerings, increase their competitiveness is a big part of what they look for us to do.
Such an interesting model, and obviously, I've seen it in others. Like I've seen healthcare with like the health systems starting to invest in funds, right, and get that innovation. We see it with the health insurance companies all the time, and this just makes total sense, especially when you think most of these community banks, they're not going to build out like a very heavy tech focus to what they're doing. They'll usually have the person that's running their IT, right, and all their security and stuff like that. But what an opportunity! So what problems are you solving for these community banks, like in the broader financial ecosystem through these investments? Like, what are the most common problems you're kind of focusing in on?
I would say, I mean, it depends, like with depending on the year or timing, like what we're really focusing on. But what we've been excited about lately is so this kind of like back office efficiency. And particularly with AI and more companies having this and the ability now to think about agents and using agentic workflows, like that's been top of mind for us because we know that the banks have so much data, but the ability to actually access it and be able to take the next step of acting upon that data is pretty difficult. And we also know like it's still pretty paper intensive. And so how can we help them? How can we create more efficiency and take away some of those jobs that no one really wants to do? No one's excited to input something in one system and then walk over to another system and input it there. So like that's where there's such a really easy use case for using these automation powered solutions. So for example, we invested into this company called DeepSea that is doing this automation solution that is powered by these agents. And we see it as RPA, like the better version of RPA, where RPA is great. It's to help start the beginning process of automation. But then if something's out of order, if a document doesn't look the same way, it breaks. So this just takes that to the next level. But by first concentrating on these back office use cases, it allows our banks to become a little bit more comfortable with it and to have that human in the loop oversight that we know is needed.
Now, how are you identifying these early stage companies that have that potential to disrupt traditional banking and address some of the critical gaps that you mentioned?
I think a big part is starting with the founder of like, do they understand this space? Can they see where the problems are? And also, like, can they work within some of the legacy solutions that are within the bank? And can they speak to that piece of it? Because I do think that that's what a big thing is of like, yes, disruption sounds really exciting, but if you can't do this in a very like a much harder regulatory environment and do it in a way that actually works with the bank, it's not going to move the needle. And so that's a big piece. Founder, and then now thinking about the actual technology. How do we evaluate that? How do we think about, is this particularly in the like generative AI use cases of, are you really using generative AI, or are you just using more traditional machine learning? It's more statistical analysis of getting under the hood. And I think that's a lot of just asking the right questions and understanding that piece. And that's what we actually spend quite a bit of a time with our banks and educating them about too, of this is the type of questions you can ask to understand what your vendor's providing and understand what the solution is doing. And particularly as they have to talk to their regulators about the technology they implement, they need to understand it and be able to speak that language in a way that makes it understandable both for their internal teams, but also for the regulators. And then, of course, like everything that typically another investor is going to look at of, is this a sustainable business model, and can this continue to grow and be effective?
You mentioned obviously your LPs or many of these community banks. Are you able to mention like any of who those banks are? If not, totally fine. And what I would like is kind of a part two to that is, how are these LPs influencing the fund's strategy and investments? I know you mentioned that you collaborate with them, you work closely with them, but would love to hear how that process works as well.
Yes. I'm going to refrain from saying the LP names just because
You don't have
we
to say
like
that. That's
to.
totally fine.
Yeah, like I just feel like we like to, and there are some like publicly have talked about it, but still I just like to protect to have them get the final say so if they're included. But how we work with them really depends on what works best for them. So some, it means that we're meeting on a monthly basis and they're coming to us and saying, these are our priorities. What are you seeing in the market that might help address these? And then also saying, what are you seeing that we should be thinking about? And then we're surfacing solutions for them. In some cases, it might be, my team really doesn't understand generative AI. Can you come to our banking conference and come talk to us about what you're seeing out there and how we can have kind of these approachable solutions? In other ways, it could be that we put on webinars that are more of like thought leadership of a big issue in banking, and which is 2024, crazy to say, but check fraud. And we put on a webinar of like, let's have a banker come on so that you can learn from a peer about what they're doing, and then also introduce you to two new solutions that potentially could help solve this problem in a new way.
You mentioned events in there somewhere, and this is probably not totally related, but like,
Yeah.
curious, as we look into 2025, what events are on your radar personally that you like to, be in or around?
For us, a big part of interacting with our base is going to the bank conferences. And so that often looks like showing up and being there and actually getting to talk with them. So that's a big part. So we go to a conference called Acquire or Be Acquired. It's in January, and we have quite a few of our bank LPs are there as well as other banks. And we just find that it's the best opportunity to be in the room with them, hear about their priorities, and also share solutions that we're seeing and get real-time feedback of, is this exciting? Does this fit into your roadmap for 2025 and 2026? So that's a big one. We'll also do the FinTech events. So we'll go to FinTech Meetup in March. And that we like to go to these FinTech ones, particularly because we can be the boots on the ground for our banks who may not want to show up for some of these, or they don't have the bandwidth to do it. Come back, share our insights, and then make those connections to people they may not have otherwise met.
As we look ahead, staying on this topic of 2025, what key trends do you anticipate in fintech and banking?
Yeah, I think for banking, of course, like agentic AI, no surprise there. Of we know that they need to have just more automation. They have so much paperwork. Thinking about what they can do there, having a fraud and having AI solutions, particularly in that piece, we know that the fraudsters are using AI. They need a solution that is equally able to combat that, and they're just not going to be able to do that without taking on those types of tools. And having more in that kind of similar vein of cybersecurity and digital resilience is a huge piece of that. Thinking about what they can do to just shore things up. They're moving more and more into cloud-based systems, so they need to be prepared. And then another one that gets talked about, I don't necessarily know if like this is starting in 2025 and will continue, is we know that there's a huge transfer of wealth that's going to happen. But how we like to think about it is it's more like the great relationship transfer versus the great wealth transfer, because it truly is that if you want to have as a bank that relationship, you need to start putting in the foundation of creating those relationships with the next generation much sooner. If you're waiting until the person who owns that account is no longer with us, like you're too late. If money's going to get moved somewhere else, you're not going to do it. So what are the types of things that the bank can do to shore up that on the side of building relationships with the account holders, like next generation and also thinking about how do we bring in the next generation of customers. And then that leads into what I think is another big area of creating more personalized experiences. And that needs to be driven by the banks using this large amount of data and actually being able to access it and use it in a way that informs the experiences, because we know younger customers want to feel like they're getting an experience that's just tailored for them. And they want it to be able to be quicker and faster. And that really needs to be driven by data.
So as it relates to BankTech Ventures in 2025, what do you think success looks like for you guys?
For our fund. For our fund, I think a big part is like we continue to add value and market intelligence to our banks, and that we show them and help them continue on their innovation journeys, and that they lean into technology, that we help them think about like how they can more efficiently use what they have invested in. So that might be looking at solutions that help with customer engagement on those existing solutions, as well as helping them bring in what's new and what's going to help them on their path moving forward. And then, I mean, of course, on the other side, the investing piece of it, of bringing in new investments that we're excited about, that we can also help on the portfolio side of introducing them to great banks, getting them revenue, getting them those introductions that really move the needle for them. And of course, as always, exits, like we're hopeful for those and working towards those all the time.
So in terms of what's next, you gave us some trends. You told us what success looks like for the fund. Outside of those two things, what else is like, what's next? What excites you about the future of BankTech Ventures?
I think building more banks into our ecosystem and that being able to introduce them to more, because that not only helps them, but it also helps our portfolio companies continue to be successful. And that's a big part of what we love doing, and that it's so special that we get to work with both sides of them and help empower both sides to continue to have impact. And so that's probably the biggest one, bringing in new banks and continuing to find companies that we can impact, of helping them think about like how they could help banks and how they could maybe find a solution that doesn't necessarily seem like a good bank fit, but we can see that vision and then we can help mold that strategy and help push that forward is really exciting for us too.
So on the other side, when you're finding these companies, obviously finding the right founders is a critical part of finding that future great company that's going to help your LPs. You don't need to give the secret sauce here, but in terms of selection, like, are there key traits that you've noticed in the founders that you've backed that you're like, it kind of gets added to the checklist because you know that if someone is following kind of this recipe as a person, they're probably putting themselves in a different class?
I don't know if there's a one size fits all. I
There's
think
not,
some of
there's
it also
not, right?
depends on the solution. Yeah, some of it also depends on the type of solution, because a different solution might require a different founder because they're selling into a different part of the financial organization. But I would say in general, of course, like the resilience to keep building, and especially in selling into financial institutions, very long sales cycles. So do they have the ability to both continue to find new sources of revenue as they wait for these bank opportunities to come in, and also keep their team motivated and excited about these when it may not move as quickly as they like? And another one that we found to be helpful is like, do you have relationships in the banking space? So like, if that is going to be the main place that you are selling into, then having those relationships and being able to do that can also be helpful in moving forward and closing the deals a little bit faster. And I would say also a thick skin, like continuing to go back and remind the bank, we're here, we want to work with you, and doing that and turning a no into a yes is also important. And in general too, of like a willingness to learn. I think that if, especially as we think about bringing solutions that may not have first been built for banks, but we see the potential in them, they might need some of that education of how do you sell to banks. And so are they willing to learn from us and from the other bankers we introduce them to on how they can do this more efficiently?
I'll also add from my point of view, out of all the people I've interviewed over the years, there seems to be this one really big trait that the most successful people have had, and it's that rejection doesn't bother them at all. Like one of my favorite quotes of all time is from Bill Ackman. In order to be successful, you have to make sure being rejected doesn't bother you at all. And it kind of points exactly towards what a lot of these founders are doing. and I think it was, what was his name? John Paul, like DeJoria, the one that started Paul Mitchell hair products and stuff. I listened to an interview with him the other day, and he was talking about in the early days he used to knock on doors, and he's like, success is at each door, no matter how many times you've knocked and had a no, going to that next door and still knocking and having enthusiasm about what you're doing. So it's really interesting. But well, Katie, I want to thank you so much for joining me here today for this conversation. Everyone, definitely go check out more about BankTech Ventures and what Katie and her team are, like, what they're working on, the companies they're working with. And I can't wait for future conversations, Katie.
Yes, me too. Thanks for having me.